Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Stephanie, and I'm with Scientists in Every Florida School. And today we're stepping into the garden, a virtual field trip series presented by Mounts Botanical Gardens and the Scientists in Every Florida School program. Our topic today, plant trickery, the secret communication between plants and animals. Scientists in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The SEFS program connects and builds long-term partnerships between teachers and scientists in order to bring current scientific research and big data into classrooms in Florida and beyond. My colleagues Brian and Elise and I are so excited to be with you here today. Mounts Botanical Gardens is a nationally acclaimed attraction for Florida residents and visitors alike, with a mission to inspire and educate through nature. I'd like to introduce Matt from Mounts, who will take the reins from here to explore the garden and introduce everyone to our scientists today. Matt?
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Boyson. I'm the horticulturalist supervisor at Mounts Botanical Garden. We're located in West Palm Beach, Florida. We're a 14-acre botanical garden with many beautiful plants and trees. We have a beautiful lake and an island. We have beautiful koi fish in our lake. Many people visit the garden every year. We usually have exhibits in the garden and plant sales, and volunteers help work in the garden along with my staff. So yeah, we're gonna get going. So first we're gonna talk about the pitcher plant. This is a carnivorous plant, meaning that it eats insects. In the wild, pitcher plants can be found mostly in bog gardens, usually in the wettest sections. Pitcher plants resemble their name. As you can see, they look like a pitcher that holds water. Okay, so let's get into this pitcher. The pitcher, oh, sorry, can we go back? Sorry. The pitcher plant resembles the pitcher. So as you can see on the slide, the insects will crawl into the pitcher because it's attracted to it. There's a nectar inside of the pitcher that attracts mosquitoes, flies, all kinds of insects. Once trapped in the pitcher, they are digested and turned into nutrients. That's how the plant eats. Sometimes in the pitcher, you can even find frogs living in there, hoping to catch a quick meal, maybe a fly or a mosquito. Sometimes these can be even called monkey cups, because sometimes the monkeys will drink the water out of the pitcher. Sometimes even thirsty humans have been known to take a drink from the pitcher. I wouldn't recommend that, but if you're in the tropical heat, sometimes you need a drink. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now we're going to talk about the acacia tree. Native to tropical and subtropical regions of the world, particularly Australia and Africa. As you can see in the slide, the giraffe eats the acacia tree in Africa. The acacia tree has many thorns on it, but the giraffe doesn't mind. He works his tongue and thick, tough lips around the thorns to eat the leaves that provide the nutrients that he needs to survive in the harsh African climate. Giraffes can eat up to 63 pounds of acacia leaves and twigs daily. We have a sweet acacia, as you see in the slide, that grows in the garden. It gets that little flower, little yellow flower, and the thorny branches make great cover for birds and other wildlife trying to hide from predators, or maybe even to make a nice nest that will be protected. At this time, I would like to introduce to you our scientist, Tulu, assistant professor within the Department of Ethnology and Nematology, Invasive Arthropod Biology Control Program at the University of Florida, IFAS Indian River Research Education Center. Tulu, take it over.
All right, thank you. I will share my screen. And then right. Okay. So thank you again for inviting me to make this presentation. Again, the topic before us is the secret communication between plants and animals. Let me start with this animation, a question that I get all the time. So that is me. I'm an entomologist, and I get this question all the time. What does that mean? Well, I study insects. And the first thing people think about is moths and butterflies. And those are cute. We all love butterflies. But you know who else like butterflies? Plants. Plants also like butterflies. They communicate constantly with insects and with other animals. So, as an entomologist, I not only study insects, but also the interactions between insects and plants and other organisms. Now, although plants cannot move around, they still manage to carry out all the functions of life in a fairly efficient manner. There are so many species around that they interact with. And there are so many aspects of their ecology that ranges from photosynthesis to tolerance to defense and even their communication system. Now, of all the different modes of communication that plants use, including visual and even touch sometimes, it is the chemical communication that is one of the most useful to plants. In fact, you can call it the one language that connects them to all the other plants and animals. So just like the movie, The Lord of the Rings, says one language to rule them all. That is really what chemical communication is to plants. Now, more specifically, plants emit various scents to communicate with animals, including insects, which is what I study as a scientist. Now, this has been happening for thousands and thousands of years, but it's only in the past few decades that scientists are catching up to this. So over the years, scientists have discovered that plants use scents to communicate with other plants. And around 1988, they found that they use scents to communicate with predatory mites. And then they communicate with parasitic wasps or parasitoids. Around 1995, they first published findings that plants communicate with scents with predatory bugs. And then later on with predatory lady beetles, which are beneficial insects. And also that plants sometimes emit repellent compounds that drive away moths. And then there's also studies later on that plants do communicate with nematodes in the soil. And then also that plants communicate with parasitic plants and even other parts of their plant. So something can be going on close to the root, and then they use the scent to communicate with a branch that is close to the top of the plant. And then plants even communicate with birds and so on. So there's a whole array of organisms that plants communicate with using the scent. Next up, I will show you 3 examples of plant trickery involving communication using scents. So, plant trickery to attract pollinators. The first example here is that of the bucket orchid, which releases scents that attract the male orchid bees. Now, the male bees collect fragrances, or what you can call perfumes, from the flowers to attract, they use that to attract female bees later on. Now, in the rush to collect the fragrances from the flowers, the bees may slip on the slippery surface of the flower and then fall into the bucket trap. Inside the bucket trap is a thick, sticky liquid that really sticks on their wings, and the bee cannot fly away. The only way for the bee to get out is to crawl through the one and only narrow exit right here that the plant has provided. Now that exit is so narrow that as the bee is crawling out, it gets a pollen sacs that is stuck on its body. Eventually, the wings dry out and the bee is outside and flying, but then it's carrying the pollen sac. The bee will eventually visit another orchid plant where it's going to drop the pollen sac, and then pollination occurs. So that's one of the tricks that plants use. So next up is plant trickery to capture insects for food. As was previously mentioned, like with the pitcher plant, One example, another example is the sundew. Now, this is another carnivorous plant. Now, we know that plants usually, do photosynthesis to provide for their food, to make their food, but sometimes plants need extra nitrogen, and they get that from protein. And how do they get their protein? From insects and other small creatures. So the sundew, they are covered with tentacles that produce a sticky dew-like substance. It's all over them. Insects and small other creatures like spiders are attracted to the scent of the plant, but they become stuck once they get on the dew. Eventually, they are wrapped up, and there's digestive enzymes that are produced, and the insect is digested. Another example is the Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap uses scent to attract insects that are looking for nectar or leaves. Here, usually the insect will get inside the trap, and it will make contact about 1 or 2 times with the trigger hair that is inside the leaves. Once that happens, the trap snaps shut within a fraction of a second, and the insect is trapped. And again, just like in the sundew, the plants produce enzymes, digestive enzymes that act on the insect, eventually digests it and absorbs it into its body. 5 to 12 days later, the trap opens up again, and it is ready to capture another insect. So another cool trick, all originating from their use of this communication system with insects. So another one that really interests me that I work on is plant trickery to defend themselves against pests. Now, plants produce a regular type of scent that pest insects use to find them, unfortunately. Now, when the pest, for instance, the caterpillar, starts to feed on the plant starts to emit a different type of scent in response to that feeding damage. These odorants attract the natural enemies of pests, such as parasitoids and predators, which eventually come to the plant and eventually kill the pest. Now, this is an indirect way of defending themselves, but it is a good trick nonetheless. In fact, both plants and the natural enemies benefit from this communication system. It is almost like the plant is sending a distress call, and the natural enemies have evolved to be able to respond to that call. So the question that everybody is probably asking is, how do insects smell plant odors? Well, insects use their antenna to smell or perceive plant odors. And insects have different forms and shapes of antenna. You may have seen some of this before. For example, most fly species will have this small club-like antenna that ends in something like a bristle. It's really a beauty if you look at it up close. And then you have termites, which have the antenna is made up of small, tiny beads. And then you have the mosquitoes. The male mosquitoes have a plumose antenna, which more looks like a feather from a bird. Then you have insects such as the lunar moth, which really has this elaborate, big, comb-like antenna. It is big like that because the male moths need that surface area to be able to smell the pheromone from the female. And then you have this guy right here. This is the longhorn beetle. Has a very, very long antenna. In fact, way longer than its body. Still on the question of how insects smell plant odors, let me dig a little bit into it. As I mentioned before, plants release different types of scents. The scent is made up of small chemical compounds. The antenna is on the insect head, and it is a primary organ of smell. There it is. And then on the antenna you have, and this is the antenna right here. And then you have, if you really blow that up and we magnify what is there, what you have is fine hair-like structures that are all over the antenna. And those hair, you can call it antenna hair. On the antenna hair, you have all those holes that are on the hair. And it is through those holes that the compounds or the scent from the plant enters into the antenna. Inside the antenna hair, you have neurons. Neurons, just like in humans. and the odor compounds bind on the neurons, and then the information is transferred to the brain of the insect. It is at this point that the insect interprets what kind of odor it is. Is it a good one or is it a bad one? Eventually, that interpretation leads to a reaction, whether the insect is going to go towards the source of the odor or it is going to run away from the source of the odor. So how do we test the response of insects to plant odors? Well, this is where science comes into place and research. This is what I do. There are various ways to test the response of insects to plant odors in the laboratory. One of the most common methods is the use of what we call olfactometers, which work in a very simple way I'm going to explain. Pictured here is the setup of an experiment to test the response of parasitoid to cotton plants. So the plants are placed in this airtight jars, and the odor from the plant is passed into each of the arms of the olfactometer. In this case, we have 3 choices of plants, and then one of the 4 arms of the olfactometer is just fresh air. So the insect will be released into the center of the olfactometer, and then when they get here, they make a choice. In fact, don't take my word for it. Let me show you exactly how it happens. Here you can see the insect climbing up the olfactometer, eventually exploring the choices for the different odor fields. And insect 1 eventually makes a choice. That is what is attractive to it. And we release insect number 2. And just like, human beings, insects behave in different ways. So not that one, and definitely not that one. And insect number 2 eventually makes its choice for the most attractive odor that it is perceiving. So what does this all mean? How can we use the communication between plants and insects to improve agriculture? Well, part of my research as a scientist and what other scientists are doing is to identify the components of the plant scent that are either attractive to the natural enemies such as parasitoids and predators, or that are repellent against the pest insects. What we're trying to do is to be able to identify those compounds, mix them together in the lab, try to reproduce those compounds and make our own cocktail of them, and eventually apply them in field settings. What this leads to is protection of our crops, very important crops. Once we make the natural mix, we can now test the behavior of the insect to our mixture that we've made. If we get good results, like I said, we start to apply these in the field to protect crops from pest damage. In that process, those scents that we produce also enhances biological control, which is the use of natural enemies to control pest insects. The overall effect of this is that we will be able to reduce the use of synthetic pesticides if we're able to, biological control can work. And when we reduce the use of insecticides, we'll make our environment cleaner and safer for everybody. So that's really where the application goes into, all trickling down from just how plants communicate with insects and other organisms to how we can actually apply it to improve agriculture. So that is all I have for today. Thank you for listening.
Lou, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciated your presentation and certainly learned a lot from it. If any of our viewers have any questions, please write them in the chat box and I'm going to ask them on your behalf today. So while our viewers are writing in their questions, I would like to ask if you can briefly describe when you realized that you could be a scientist that researches a topic like this.
So really my journey as an entomologist started when I was I really did not like bugs when I was really small. Other kids played with bugs. I did not play with bugs. I was scared of them. But during my senior year in college, I got to work with another professor who was working on insects. and I had about this talk about phorid flies. These are parasitic wasps that kill fire ants. So what they do is the female of the phorid fly lays their egg inside the fire ant, and eventually the larvae eventually crawls inside the fire ant, goes to the head, and eventually cuts off the head of the fire ant as it emerges from the fire ant. So I thought that was really cool. I never even knew that insects could do that, for an insect to lay their egg inside another insect. So that was where I started liking to work with parasitoids, and that's what got me into entomology.
Very nice. Our next question, actually piggybacking off that idea, comes from Chloe, who asks, can you please explain exactly what a parasitoid is?
Yes, maybe I should have made that a little clearer. So parasitoids, like I said, they are another group of insects. Most of them are flies, or they're like wasps. So what they do is, in order to complete their life cycle, they have to lay their eggs inside or outside another insect. So for example, the one that I showed with the braconid parasitoid, they lay their eggs inside a caterpillar. So the female will lay their eggs inside the caterpillar of a moth, for example. And eventually the larvae of the wasp develops inside that host, eventually feeds inside the host. And when it is ready to, but it doesn't kill the host right away. When it is ready to emerge out as an adult, then it comes out, and that's when the host actually dies. So it's a two-way system. The parasitoid is using the host to reproduce, but at the same time, it is helping the plants to control the pest. So that is what parasitoids are.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Peter, who asks, how did scientists first find out that plants and animals can communicate with each other?
So as I said in one of the slides, this is something that has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. Plants and insects are locked into this cycle of, it's an arms race, okay, for survival. And scientists have always known that insects feed on plants. They need that for food. And that plants somehow, in a way, they kind of tolerate it sometimes, and sometimes they don't tolerate that feeding. It eventually kills the plant sometimes. But then they found out that there's another group of insects, like the parasitoids and predators that we call natural enemies, that also find their way to the plants, but they do not harm the plants. So they were wondering, what are they doing on the plants, and how do they get to the plant? So that's when scientists started looking at whether plants produce some type of chemicals to communicate with the insects. They eventually found it using different methods, like using gas chromatography and some other methods, to see that, yes, insects and plants do communicate using scents.
Next up, we have a question from Central Park, and they ask, ultimately, who outsmarts whom? Plants or insects? Which one would you say is more intelligent?
That is a great question. You cannot really say that one outsmart the other, and there are different systems. So there are the plant insect interaction system will be different in different combinations. For example, let me give you an example with caterpillars that feed on plants. Well, they may eventually feed on a lot of the leaves, but the damage may not be enough to destroy the plant. The plant may still survive, maybe over the winter when the insect is not that very active. But in some other ways, some insects also transmit diseases. In that case, for example, like the Asian citrus psyllid transmit the citrus greening disease to the citrus plant. You only need just one psyllid to transmit that, which is, can be really devastating. So it is not a question of who outsmarts who. It's a question of how they have both co-evolved over the time, which, like I said, it's an arms race. The plant tries to defend itself, the insect tries to find food, and it goes back and forth. Sometimes the insects even tries to counter the defenses of the plant. For example, the chemicals that the plants use to defend themselves, they try to make it so that it doesn't affect them that much. And then the plant comes up with, some other tricks, maybe some physical tricks, like using thorns and hairs and everything that prevents the insect from getting it. So it's a continuous battle that they do.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Roxanne says, hi, I'm the president of a rare fruit council in Palm Beach County. My job is to find speakers for our monthly meetings. How can I contact you regarding a potential speaking opportunity in January?
Oh, thank you for that. You can contact me via the University of Florida Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology website. And I can also leave my email. My email is the best way to contact me. I don't know how to do that right here, but I can give you my email.
We can put that in the chat box for you.
Okay, so yeah, you know my email.
Joy is wondering, how many years before we can stop using chemical pesticides altogether? What are your insights on that idea?
That is a very good question. It is, I can't say that we will eventually get to a point where we don't use chemical pesticide. The reason is this. So what are the alternatives that we as scientists are working towards for alternatives to using synthetic pesticides? Those are like biological control or some cultural control, where, for example, you can use protective screens on plants or just by weeding your plants regularly. Or you can use more dedicated means like biological control, where we actually introduce predators and parasites to the field to control the plants. But it all depends on the level of infestation of the insect in the field. For example, if there's a really low level of infestation in the field, biological control will work, and that is good. Biological control is also good when a new insect has just been introduced into the country. For example, a lot of them enter Florida, and we don't have the natural enemies yet. That's a good way for biological control to work. But when you have insects that are widespread and there's a lot of it in your field, sometimes these other methods may not work as well as a chemical control, which is why we try to tell growers to identify the problem quickly, so that means that are not chemical control can be used. So it's not a matter of when we're going to get to completely free of chemical pesticides. It's a matter of how we keep decreasing the use of chemical pesticides.
Thank you. We have River Hall Elementary School in Fort Myers, Florida, tuning in, and they would like to know, what do you need to become an entomologist, and what made you go into the career?
Yeah, so what you need to become an entomologist is really the passion. It is really the passion. I know a lot of kids, they like insects, they call it creepy crawlies. Kids play with insects, but really that is really the basis of it. And eventually, as you go up, you tend to study more about insects. You tend to study their means, their reproduction, their flight, their behavior, how they eat food, how they find food, and everything. Unfortunately, or fortunately, entomology is not something you can specialize in unless you get to college level. So once you get to college, there are universities that actually offer entomology as a major. And then you can also get advanced degrees, like a master's degrees or a PhD in entomology. However you want to go, you just get more and more knowledge. We also have a national association, the Entomological Society of America, where you can attend meetings to know more about insects, or you can just, contact someone in the Department of Entomology and Nematology at the University of Florida. They will give you some guidance on how to become an entomologist as a profession.
And we have time for just about one or two more questions. Our next one is going to come from Monica, who asks, could you describe a typical day for you as a scientist?
Well, so I would say that there is now a difference in my typical day from the days of the pandemic. But besides the pandemic, I wake up in the morning, I check my emails because there's always a lot of emails waiting for me. And then I take my breakfast, get a shower, and then head to my office. Once I get to the office, I do some more emails again, and then go to my lab, talk with my coworkers and people that are also in my lab. We go over what we have to do for that day, whether we need to go to the field to, collect field traps or anything. And then that's it. And then I have some more meetings to do, and then maybe some experiments to perform. And then we get back. That's the end of my day, and I come back and have the rest of the day to myself.
Thank you. And as we begin to wrap up, I just have one more question for you for myself. What advice would you have for our students in the audience, our elementary, middle, and high school students that are interested in science as they go through the rest of this academic year and as they continue their education as a science student and want to learn more about science in the future, what advice would you have for them?
I would say that, being a scientist is all about your interests. It's all about being inquisitive, just wanting to know more. That's really how you become a scientist, whether you study something specifically or not. If you have that mind that you want to know more, that is how you become a scientist. So I would say keep working hard, keep following your interests. If you like insects, well, take it to the next level. See, maybe you can get a college degree studying insects. There's a lot more to know about insects than we know as kids, as I've shown in this presentation. So just keep at it, keep a good work attitude, and just keep up the interest.
Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you sharing everything with us today. At this point, Stephanie's going to take over to wrap things up.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you so much, Tolu, for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. It was super engaging and interesting. We'd like to have you all complete the survey at the end of today's presentation. You can see it here on your screen. And I believe Elise is also sticking it once again in the chat box for you. If you click on that link and take a moment to fill out that survey, it would be greatly appreciated. And finally, let me flip the slide here. There we go. You can learn more about Mounts and SEF's programs by visiting the websites you see here on your screen, following us on social media, and our YouTube channel at UF Earth Systems will have a recording of today's virtual field trip along with extension activities for K-12. We also hope to see you next time at our virtual collaborative event on November 17th at 10 a.m. entitled Thanksgiving Bounty, the Importance of Produce. Thanks again to everyone for attending and joining us today, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.